Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the United States of America. The meeting between Zelensky and Trump ended almost 2 days ago, but we are still receiving signals and signs of what exactly were happening there. I would like to remind you that Zelensky came to the United States of America just with one purpose, to get Tomahawk missiles, but instead of this he got humiliation, dozens of portions of humiliations in his address, and this is the first one. At the first seconds on the territory of the United States of America, Zelensky was humiliated. Nobody came to his aircraft to meet him, and this is obviously not good. He realized that most likely he would not get anything from the United States of America, and that humiliation wasn't the only humiliation during his trip to the United States of America. Probably humiliation with a tie is the biggest one. The scandal surrounding the Pentagon chief's tie in the colors of the Russian flag at his meeting with Zelensky is being discussed in the USA. Activists have already found a similar tie on American marketplaces. It's called just that, a tie in the colors of the Russian flag. Trump's team has begun to defend itself. Vice President Vance commented maybe he was wearing America's colors. So as for now, nobody will be able to give us the exact answer to this question. Furthermore, during the previous 12 hours, we got very interesting statements and articles that were published by different media. For example, let's discuss this one. This is the article about conversation between Trump and Putin. In the conversation with Trump, Putin demanded that Ukraine abandon control of the entire Donetsk region in exchange for ending the war, according to the Washington Post. In exchange, the Kremlin is allegedly willing to consider abandoning and rejecting its claims to parts of the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions. The publication notes that such a bargain effectively cements Russia's control over Donbass and repeats Moscow's old demands despite Trump's talk of a peace plan. Ukrainian and European officials call the idea unacceptable. According to one diplomat, it's like trying to sell the Ukrainians their own leg. So as we can see, the Europeans and Ukraine itself will never accept these demands, and they will continue fighting with the Russians along the line of combat contact. Another important article was published by the Wall Street Journal. The White House is putting more pressure on Kiev, showing hesitancy in pressuring Moscow, according to the Wall Street Journal. Trump is showing hesitancy in pressuring Russia. The US plans to hold more preliminary meetings with Russia ahead of the Putin-Trump meeting than before the Alaska talks. The elevation of Marco Rubio's status sends a signal to Russia that the US is now operating with a diplomatic process that Moscow understands as it is comfortable with. Another important statement was made by the former commander-in-chief of the General Staff of the United Kingdom. Ukraine has received false hope from its Western allies and will not be able to dislodge Russian forces from Ukrainian territory without the help of NATO forces that will not interfere with ground operations. Ukraine is not an existential issue for the West, so NATO will never conduct a ground operation there. We are waging a kind of hybrid war with Russia, but that is not the same as firepower war in which our soldiers are dying in huge numbers. Despite our sympathy for Ukraine, I side with those who argue that this is not in our vital national interest. So the outlook for Ukraine is bleak. It must negotiate peace terms with the Kremlin, says former British chief of the General Staff. So most likely this is going to happen sooner or later. The question is when, sooner or later, and obviously the price for this sooner or later is going to be very high. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 12 hours we received lots of very interesting updates. And first let's discuss the video that was published from the area of the city of Pavlograd. The Russian sources published this video during the previous 12 hours, and here we can see the position of a Patriot system, air defense system of Ukraine, that was established by the Ukrainians a few days ago with the purpose to bring down Russian aircrafts and maybe Russian drones and missiles. But the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover this air defense system, its radar, its position, command center position, and the launching system. And first, the Russians destroyed the radar and the command post, and with Iskander missile, and with the next strike, the Russians destroyed the launching system as well. So very huge air defense system was destroyed, and the sources are saying that during the period of the special military operation, the Russians managed to destroy air defense systems, Patriot air defense systems worth $120 billion. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. And first let's talk about the Poltavka fortified area. So this is the situation by the end of the 18th of October of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 19th of October. The eastern part of the Poltavka fortified area was colored completely in the Russian favor. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians with FPV drones across the river of Yanchul. Lots of positions were attacked with FPV drones, and based on this video we came to conclusion that at least the eastern bank of the river of Yanchul is under complete Russian control. As for the western bank, there is still some doubts whether there are most likely still some pockets of resistance from the Ukrainian side, and most likely there are very heavy clashes for this area. But we believe that today or tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm complete control over the territory from the Russian side. At the same time, the Russians are focused in their offensive operation towards the settlement of Privolne. Now the Russians are trying to get as close as possible, and the Russians are trying to capture the eastern bank of the Uspenovka fortified area at the eastern bank of the river of Yanchul in this region. In this video, we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking farms in the northern part of the Uspenovka fortified area in the area of the settlement by the name of Privilya. We believe that this territory would be captured by Russia also in coming days. I would like to remind you that just yesterday the Russians secured the settlement of Privilya completely. Now the Russians are trying to capture the village of Privolne in the same area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Pokrovsk and the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. One thing is clear, that the inevitable is approaching. Most likely the city of Pokrovsk will fall in Russia's hands in coming days, maybe weeks, but most likely in coming days, at least its southern part. During the previous 12 hours, we received lots of very interesting changes on the ground that were provided by different resources. So the Russian major offensive operation in the city of Pokrovsk began several days ago, more precisely around 14th or 13th of October of 2025. So this is the situation, for example, by the end of the 13th of October, and this is most likely the moment when everything started. The Russians began offensive operation from two directions. The Russians began assault operation from the east. They captured two villages, Kazatsk and Balagan. At the same time, the Russians began offensive operation from the west, trying to improve their positions on the territory of the city of Pokrovsk itself. And by the end of the 15th of October, the Russians captured the settlement of Novopavlovka. And it was something like a turning point in the battle for the city, because right after this moment, the Ukrainians began retreating in the northern direction, as if they expected that the Russians most likely will intensify their attacks and will capture the southern part without any resistance. So this is the situation, and this is exactly a turning point in the battle for the southern part of the city. By the end of the 16th of October of 2025, we start receiving updates that the Russians are advancing in the southern direction along the railways and are approaching the settlement of Gnatovka. Furthermore, according to information we have, by the end of the 17th of October, the Russians managed to secure almost completely the western part, and we received first geolocations that confirmed that. Furthermore, several pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians managed to break through even further and to capture almost completely the northwestern part of the city of Pokrovsk, and that led to complete collapse of Ukrainian logistic and supply and support of the Ukrainian contingent on the territory of the entire agglomeration. And that was another turning point in the battle for the city. Another defense layer collapsed without almost any resistance. By the end of the 18th of October, we got lots of reports how Ukrainian soldiers were retreating in the direction of the northern part of the city, trying to cross the railways. This is something like a red line, a barrier that split the lives of Ukrainian soldiers before and after. But lots of Ukrainian soldiers and groups were ambushed by Russians almost in the central central part of the city. And by the beginning of the 19th of October of 2025, several pro-Russian resources reported that the southern part, the eastern part, and the southeastern part of the city of Pokrovsk collapsed completely. So this is the map that was provided by pro-Russian resources, and this is another map published by another pro-Russian resources, and both of them are telling just about one thing, that the city of Pokrovsk, the southern part of the city of Pokrovsk either has already fallen or about to be captured by Russia, and obviously this is going to happen in coming days. If Ukrainians lose the city of Pokrovsk, most likely we will not even see the battle for the city of Mirnograd, because there's going to be no point to fight for Mirnograd, because in this case Ukrainians would be completely caught by Russians in cauldron without any chances for evacuation. And I would like to remind you that the President of Russian Federation demands that Ukrainians abandon their positions in the rest of Donbas region in exchange for not moving further in Kherson direction and Zaporozhye direction. But the problem is that the Russians are very close to the end of the Donbas region, Donetsk region. If Russia captured the entire Donetsk region, and if Ukrainians rejects Russian proposals and demands, most likely the next target for the Russians would be the city of Zaporozhye itself. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Seversk Liman direction. Lots of very interesting updates are coming from this area. First, I would like to remind you that just yesterday pro-Ukrainian resources made very interesting adjustments on their maps by adding huge gray zone between the city of Liman and the settlement of Zarechne. This biggest gray zone ever shows us that most likely the Russians managed to break through Ukrainian defense and to get as close as possible to the city of Liman itself. And during the previous 12 hours, we got additional details about the situation on the ground. Russian forces are conducting attacks deep into the forest and reached Liman city. Today we got report that several Russian soldiers and units managed even to enter the city limits of the city of Liman, which means that the battle for the territory has begun. And I would like to remind you once again that the Russians are doing the same thing as they did in 2022 when they were attacking the city of Liman. The Russians outflanked the main Ukrainian positions in the fields through the forest, and first they cut this part of the city, this one, the southeastern, this citadel, and as soon as the Russians captured this territory, the entire defense of the Liman direction collapsed in 2022, and most likely this year we're going to see the same story. It seems that the battle for the city of Liman will be finished much faster than we expected. As for this Kupiansk direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours we received more updates about the situation on the ground. The Ukrainians are in panic and in chaos. Their forces on the eastern bank of the river Oskol are completely uncontrollable, and we expect that in coming days the Ukrainians would abandon their positions. Another important thing that I would like to point to your attention is that today is the 19th of October of 2025 and tomorrow is the 20th of October. And Zelensky and the Ukrainian parliament yet haven't extended the martial law and the mobilization. And Ukrainian Zelensky and the parliament have less and less time for these purposes. I would like to remind you that the current mobilization and the current martial law ends on the 5th of November. Usually the Ukrainians adopt another law about the extension of this to situation much earlier, but this time Zelensky thought he would get Tomahawk missiles, and he was planning to use Tomahawk missiles as excuse for his population for another extension of the martial law, but this time nothing worked out. So we believe that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, so on Monday or Tuesday, Zelensky will and the parliament of Ukraine will adopt another law about another extension of the mobilization and the martial law, and right after the Russians will begin bombing and attacking Ukraine with missiles and drones massively, because this is going to be another escalation that will not be accepted neither by the Russians nor by the United States of America. And that's it for the short video. Military with Summary channel reminds to we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.